Hello, Something Guys and Gals. This is Something Guy 912 here with you in a desperate attempt for clicks and publicity is my official TF2 core map tier list. Now, this is kind of something I've wanted to do, seeing that there's no particular popular videos that have been come out from the major TF tubers, as they're called, that have made a tier list such as this. So I figured, I'm actually doing something a little bit original, and this can be foreshadowing for a eventual series I want to do about TF2 as a whole, like in a similar vein to Emperor Lemon's There Will Never Ever series. And this is also completely off the cuff because I'm just going to sort of rant about each of the maps in general. So before I start, I have to lay down the ground rules for what is considered a core map. So when you boot up TF2, there's a casual tab that you click, and then there's core game mode. So all the maps in the core game mode section will be included in this list. No alternative game modes like Payload Race or like the Group Keep or the Arena maps or any event tier maps. So none of those. Secondly, any maps that have similar variants like Sawmill will just be included as their respective names, and I'll go into their variants as well. And they'll be rated on just the general feeling of the map from variant to variant, like CTF or Arena or whatever. And thirdly, this is a rating based on their actual viability in game and not whether or not they're really cool meme maps. So maps like 2-Fort or Turbine are not going to be rated highly just because they're glorified deathmatch pits, and whether they actually fit the theme. And seeing that I'm already talking about CTF 2-Fort, let's start with 2-Fort. And 2-Fort is going to get a really, really hard F because, man, that fucking map does not does not hold up well after like 12 years of gameplay. With all the new additions and the weapons and the gameplay styles, CTF 2-Fort is just a really telling display of of antiquity. Now, in sparse amounts, it can be a really fun game, a really fun map to play on if you just want to sink some hours into doing silly meme loadouts. But in terms of viability, you have two really long sniper sight lines, which is why there's so many like fucking snipers playing on this map in particular. Long fucking passageways that have barely any health kits or ammo packs, so you have to come in with a really dedicated push to even get through into the intelligence room, or just basically have to roam like a scout with a bonk or something like that. There are really, really tight corridors, so scouts and spies are pretty much fucked in terms of trying to, strafe or avoid or flank the enemy in any certain way. And it also gives huge advantages to classes like the Demo and Soldier, which can just shoot down those corridors with impunity. So CTF 2-Fort gets a solid F for me. Now the next map is CTF CP5 Gorge. Now technically it's a different name to CP Gorge, but I included those in two separate slots, seeing as they have different names, and CP Gorge has a few more variants to it from 5 Gorge. I'm going to put 5 Gorge at a tier because it's genuinely pretty good as a CP map with 5 control points rather than an attack defend, because the attack defend version of Gorge is a little bit choky on parts, especially at the end with sentries just down below on the balcony or up top. With CP5 Gorge, there's a lot more opportunities for flanking on the top and enough verticality where most of the classes can benefit from. So with that, I might as well bring up the normal CP Gorge, which I'm going to put down to B as a result. Now, CP Gorge is still pretty decent, but like I said before, the final point can get really choky at parts, where you really need to fucking push hard, or you're just going to get sniped down, or, the engines are just going to continuously build more and more sentries to just halt the progress. With that, the next map is Badlands, and that includes the arena, the COP, and the CP version. Well, not the arena version, because that's not included in the core game modes. And with Badlands, I'm looking at my list here so that I don't forget where I put it. I'm going to put it down a little bit at C, and the reason for that is that in terms of viability and gameplay, there's also an issue with who you're going to be queued up with, and a lot of like semi-pro people will queue up for this map since it's usually one that gets circulated around the competitive mode for TF2. So with that, you're usually going to come up with a lot more difficult players to play against. And Badlands also has a little bit too much over-reliance on like the verticality. Like there's a lot of like really high off places where most players won't be able to see up, and they'll just get shot down by soldiers or demos who can know how to abuse them. And there's also a lot of props on the map that can get players stuck or just, you know, disorient some players or whatnot. And there's also an issue with the fact that the Badlands is designed at the final points to be sort of like a bat cap area. And I'll bring up another map, CP map, that also has a similar issue, but to a much worse degree. Anyway, yeah, CP Badlands and the COP version get a C for me. Next is Badwater, and Badwater sort of suffers the same issues with 2-port in regards to its antiquity, but to a lesser degree. It's still pretty solid on most parts, except for the fact that it suffers a lot from the long fucking valleyways where snipers have a huge advantage over most other classes. There's also, between points A and B, there's a huge yard area that just gets severely underused. It's completely pointless to the objective of the game, and I don't know why it's honestly in it unless you want to go on the other side and try to snipe sentries that might get posted up on the rooftops. But yeah, beyond that, it has some issues, but it's genuinely sometimes pretty fun to play on. But you also have an issue with competitive players also queuing up for this map, so you might come across more try-hardy people. Next we have Bartlett Blitz, which is actually a slightly newer map, but I'm also going to put this one, unfortunately, at a C because simply because of the final point. And the final point is such a fucking choke of a map because you have a very small little like L-shaped corridor for the blue team to push in, where the red can just shoot down and spam stickies and rockets at will, and then the blue team have a narrow stairway to the left of the corridor where the same thing will happen, and then they have this weird locker on the far right that doesn't really give them a lot of opportunities to really deal any damage to the red team beyond just, you know, spamming down on sentries that might be on the ground floor, or, you know, coming up with a surprise Uber. But yeah, Bartlett Blitz suffers from its suffers down because of the final checkpoint being just an absolute fucking choke that can easily be won if you have at least 2 dedicated engineers and a pyro to deal with air blasts. And with that, we actually have a slightly better map in terms of payload, is PL Borneo, and I'm going to put this one at an A because it actually has a pretty decent aesthetic going on for it, sort of jungle theme before the Jungle Inferno update, and actually has some pretty nice flanks and pretty nice spawn points for both teams. There's some competitive angle with this one. You might have some more tougher players, but genuinely you'll have some pretty well-balanced teams. And some pretty fun gameplay overall. Like, all the classes benefit from this particular map. Like, NGs can have some tricky choke points. It might get an S tier if not for the fact that Borneo suffers similarly to Bartlett Blitz in that it has a choky last point where NGs can just put 2 sentries and just, like, hold out the enemy team from capping, but there's enough flanks and enough open areas for them to actually assault the sentries in order to win. So it's not a guaranteed win if 2 NGs put down some sentries. And with that, we come across another cough dedicated map, Brazil. I'm also going to put this one at an A because it's a pretty decent cough map in terms of being able to circle around and flank enemies. Although, again, it suffers from being an S because of the competitive angle. There's way too many, like, really fucking top-tier people that play on this map. Even though Brazil is probably one of the lesser queued up maps in terms of population. It's kind of hard for me to actually queue up for this map in particular. Probably because it's also one of the Jungle Inferno add-ins with the update. But yeah, genuinely a pretty fun map to play on. You won't get shot down by stunning things way too much. And I guess there is some issue with not being able to look up because there's a lot of elevations and it might confuse you where you need to go, but overall it's a pretty fun map. Now, we come to CP Coldfront. Now this one is probably a personal favorite of mine. I don't know why, but I think this is probably my most favorite map to actually play on. And it's such a shame that I don't get to queue up on it more often, because often I'll get queued up into it like just before a match ends or like halfway into it, and I never get an opportunity to play as much. But I'm going to put it on the solid S tier. Like, not only is it really good in aesthetic, like there's a lot of really nice lighting, but Coldfront also benefits from a lot of great flanks, like multiple different flanks, a lot of openness, not too much openness to where a sniper can benefit from just sniping down on a point. And more importantly, you know, the snipers can also suffer from tunnel vision a lot in Coldfront, but just, you know, just a lot of fucking great atmosphere in general with this particular map. A lot of attention to detail, especially with the central point, with this destroyed, like, house. With all this stuff where soldiers and demos can hide in little cheeky spots and wait for the enemy to arrive for a surprise attack. It's a really satisfying map. I really enjoy it. It's just a shame I can't fucking queue up on it more often, but that's not something I'm going to shun the map for, and more just for the queue. Now the next CTF map comes to Double Cross. And Double Cross is basically 2 Fort, but improved in a lot of ways, but not quite where it lands in A or S tier, so I'm going to put it in the B. While there are some, like, sniper galleries with Double Cross in similarity to 2 Fort, there's a lot more opportunities for the other teams to flank. You can actually have really good spawns where you can drop down into any of the varying levels of the two teams' bases, and a lot of, like, really creative ways to go steal the intelligence. There is a little bit where, there's this fucking little drop down, that you would go into a back way into the intelligence, and unless you are particularly mobile class, you're gonna get kind of stuck there. And, NGs can, abuse those with, sentries, but that's usually a common issue with CTF maps in general, is that just throwing enough sentries can just stall the game for, like, hours almost. But in general, Double Cross is definitely what 2 Fort needs to be, is a decent deathmatch map, but you can still focus on the objective and you won't just get abused by certain specialist or generalist classes. Now the next map is Fastlane, I believe. Fastlane, yep. I am going to put this on a B. It has similar issues to Badlands in that there's a lot of weird geometry in the area. There's like those little hoodoos, like from Payload hoodoo, that don't really serve a lot of purpose other than for scouts to try to stray through rockets and whatnot. But the problem with Fastlane is that it's way too, what could you say, long? Like, not exactly long in that it's a long map, it's just, it's way too horizontal. It's like, almost like way too long in terms of its comparative to its width. You know, there's not really a whole lot of opportunities to get up on higher areas, or in specific parts of each of the points. Like in the central point, there's these little rafters in the central point you can get up, but most people don't even realize they're there, so nobody really takes advantage of it. And with, you know, B and D point, they're just these obvious fucking raptors where snipers will, you know, pin down the whole point that you can just go up to with relative ease. And then with the final points, like, again, there's just a little balcony that's pretty obvious to see where NGs will usually put sentries up there, so it doesn't really take much advantage of, like, the vertical and just over-relies on the horizontal. And with that, we come to Egypt. Now, Egypt, I have a fucking axe to grind with this particular map because of the weird choice of geometry with certain spawn points. Like, Egypt has a similar issue with Dustbowl, and that has the 3-stage issue. Although, with Egypt, there's really no excuse for it, because Egypt is a much newer map that kind of relies on newer mechanics that were introduced in the game. So with that, I'm going to put it in an E, because the first point is just really like, just puts blue team at a disadvantage with these long fucking sliding corridors that take like hours to fucking open when the match actually starts, and it just gives the red team an opportunity to get some quick kills with no fucking effort on their part. And then you have the second stage where, again, the blue team is just at a huge disadvantage because they're way down low where the red team's up high, where they have the vantage point on every single scale. And then, again, with the final stage is another issue where the fucking blue team are once again on the bottom, where the red team's on top, where they have a direct advantage. And you have all this overtly bright geometry that'll usually blind you from what you're trying to fucking attack, or trying to hit, or where to go. It's just not fundamentally strong as a map. And with that, we go to Payload Enclosure, another relatively new map introduced with the Jungle Inferno update. And Enclosure is probably one of the first new maps, payload maps, that has like a 3-stage tier, whereas most of these other payloads are just kind of one stage, like with Payload Frontier and the aforementioned PL Hoodoo. But well, stages, it usually makes the game way too overlong, so I'm going to put it about at a B, because Enclosure, in spite of it being called Enclosure, has a lot of open space, surprisingly enough. Maybe a little bit too much, where, you know, snipers can take advantage of it, or there's just way too many areas for spies to hide behind where their cloak will not be heard, and where people will not be looking. It's just probably could have been like downsized a little bit, because watching Uncle Dane's video on the actual like playable area of the maps, PL Enclosure is the biggest of all of them. Even though it's just a payload map. But, you know, I still appreciate Enclosure's general aesthetic, with it being kind of like a, you know, an animal enclosure for yetis or whatnot. So with that, you know, I'm not going to shit on it too hard, so I'll put it at a B. Okay, so Dustbowl, since I completely skipped on it, although I did mention it, I'm putting it at a D because it suffers a lot of the same issues with CTF2 but it's one of the most played CP maps I can think of. There's like multiple fucking maps just queue up for it 24 hours with nearly full servers, as well as like class wars and whatnot. But Dustbowl suffers a lot of the same issues with Antiquity in regards to really tight choke points where scouts and spies very rarely ever get any opportunities to do anything. A lot of long fucking corridors where snipers and soldiers can take advantage of it, of the range. And then you have tight alleyways in this final stage where, again, a lot of spam-worthy classes get huge advantages with little to no effort. But, you know, CP Dustbowl does have its charm here and there, whereas with 2-4, it's just only good if you just playing it sparsely and just memeing and not actually trying to play the objective. At least with Dustbowl, it gives you a fucking reason to play the objective. Anyway, we're going now to CP Foundry. Now, CP Foundry is also another map that I really like aesthetically, a really nice like industrial yard and whatnot. And I believe it's also has a manpower variant, although I've never actually played manpower because that shit looks way too confusing to deal with. Anyway, I'm going to put it at an A because it's a pretty solid map that uses both verticality and vertical and horizontal paths to great credit, where, you know, sometimes snipers can get an advantage or heavies can make great use of the sometimes tight corridors like the containers at B and D point, or the little tight hallways at the end points and whatnot. So, you know, all classes pretty much generally signed, but it would have made it to S tier if not for it having a bit of a competitive edge to it, since it sometimes gets queued up for competitive modes and has actual competitive cycling and whatnot. And now it's time for one of the more obscure CP maps, but severely underrated, is CP Freight. Now, I was a little bit turned off with this map with the long hallways at like near the B and D points before the central point, but I really like how it all actually culminates pretty well with flanking out opponents and whatnot. So I'm going to put it also at an A. It also has two small train passages that aren't just used for just fucking killing the enemy team, or killing your allies or the enemy, but you can also use them to get around certain areas if you're a cheeky spy or whatnot. And you can even stop the train. I believe you can still stop the train if you use a cloak and dagger spy as the train is passing, since it won't automatically kill you once it passes through the gates. But yeah, it's not just there for just to kill the enemy, but it's actually, you can actually use it for something. In fact, CP Freight is almost a slightly better version of WELL in almost every way, where it's not too linear and has a lot of, like, you know, side paths that you can take to, you know, catch the enemy team off guard. So that, I really appreciate it. So now we're going to PL Frontier, another really great map, although I would put it at an S if not for the fact that this map gets queued up more than any other PL map that I play on casual. It's really starts to get annoying. But PL Frontier gets an A because it uses a lot of geometry in a really great way. And it also has a really inventive style, with the Payload being this large train with a large platform for the team to get on. And unusually so, this particular Payload map also has extremely short respawn times, and I think that might be because of the size of the map. Like, for red team, your respawn times will not be more than 10 seconds at most. And with the blue team, you'll almost, like, respawn as soon as you die for them. So there's a lot of, like, constant action going. Another little gripe I could probably give for PL Frontier is that the blue spawns are really not that great. Like, their beginning spawn is like the only halfway decent one, but with B spawn and C, like their second and third spawn that they get once they capture the fourth, I believe, the third objective, it just gets really fucking bad. Like, they just get shut down into this tiny little hole where if the red team is coordinated enough, they can just trap them in there. So yeah, it suffers from that. But genuinely, Frontier is a really great map, just to have a lot of fun in. And now with that, we come to another, release date map, PL Gold Rush. And PL Gold Rush, like all the other maps, suffers a lot from the antiquity of it all. But at least PL Gold Rush does, again, make you want to attempt to play the objective, even if the geometry of it is a bit confused. Again, it has really tight corridors, not a lot of open space, too much fucking opportunities for snipers to just take advantage of how they have this infinite fucking sniper line. Not to mention, PL Gold Rush has one of the worst chokes in the first stage, after you capture the first point, which is genuinely pretty easy, like, there's this just huge fucking little bottleneck that the team has to go in where they just get super skittish because they don't know if there's like 6 different snipers just pining down on that little spot right there. And not to mention the constant amounts of spam from the soldiers and demos, so you're pretty much fucked on that as well. But with the you know, the the chokes don't stop. Like with the second stage, once the blue team catches the first point, they're once again introduced to a O-shaped choke. Although, you know, thankfully they actually have an upper balcony where they can drop down from with surprise attacks. But it doesn't really get that much better from then on out. Maybe the final stage is probably the best part because of it being a 3-point capture rather than a 2-point capture. And, you know, the red spawn actually connects from the shorter shortcut to the longer end at the final points. So, but genuinely, it just fails in terms of antiquity. And with that, we have Well and all of its variants, which I believe is just CP and Arena. I don't think Well has a... or, no, not Well, Granary. I don't think Granary has a cough version. I think it only has Arena and CP. And Granary, I'm going to put as C. Now, while Granary does have, is another Valve, like, a release date map when the game actually came out, like, Granary has kind of held up, over the years, even though it still has a heavy competitive meta, so you're going to get pretty much shot down your throat by really good scouts or spies if you get queued up in casual sometimes. But, you know, CP Granary will be one of the more genuinely exciting maps to play, since you'll have, you know, you'll have a lot more fun playing against other people, and the maps won't just end in like 3 minutes with just easy caps. But again, there is that competitive edge to be accounted for, so there might be a huge disbalance of teams in general. And there's also a lot of like really weird verticality, like, you know, you can even see in the in the thumbnail here that there's these containers you can jump on, which most people don't look up from, and usually are the best places to just lay an assault down if you're a sniper or a soldier, and most other classes won't really be able to benefit from it other than scouts who know how to bunny jump. So yeah, not exactly the best map, but it's still, you know, halfway decent at a C. And now we come to another really heavy competitive map, Snakewater. Snakewater I would put at a B, because it's a genuinely newer map, so it has a lot more openness while still maintaining some tight corridors, but also has enough flanking routes for other classes. But Snakewater again suffers from having way too much competitive, like, competitive awareness, where you're, again, just going to be queued up with a lot more difficult players, and you're probably genuinely not going to have a good time if your team just sucks ass. But if your teams are balanced, again, it'll be a really fun game. Like, it won't take a short amount of time to just beat the other team unless they're really not coordinated. There's a lot of weird janky paths. Like, there's this one window between C and D that can really only be used by, like, demos and soldiers if they know how to rocket jump, and maybe spies just to try to avoid the other team and try to get around their back line. So there's like some areas that are just only situationally good that most won't really take advantage of. And with that, we come to cross another fucking competitive heavy map that I am not going to rate as high, and it'll be CP Goalie Wash, and I would put this one at a C. And this is merely because the flanking routes on this map do not make a whole lot of sense. Like, there's this weird rafter if you go up the hallway from the spawn point on the right that does not have a drop down. It has an arrow and is great, but you can't use it. And it just seems like a wasted potential to actually have a decent drop down for scouts. But there is a drop down on the weird choke hanging on the left before you walk into C. And not to mention, like, Goalie Wash, just on a design point, just is really fucking weird. Like, the middle point is this weird spiral that, sure, you can cap it on the central area, but I guess soldiers can also cap on top of it. And then the D and B points are this, is not even a square, but it's like this weird rooftop thing where, again, scouts can easily backcap. And speaking of backcaps, Goalie Wash is probably the king of backcaps because it has this area called River, usually called River in competitive scenes, where, again, scouts and spies can just, you know, backcap from the back. And it's just not really fair if, you know, if your team's really doing a pretty good job pulling back the other team and then just some cheeky scout just comes in from the back out of nowhere. It's just not genuinely fair. At least with Snakewater, at least you know it's coming, but with Goalie Watch, it's just like, what? It just suffers from a lot of weird, like, indecisive architecture in general. And then with that, finally, we come to Cough Harvest. Now, this is probably one of the most played Cough maps I can think of. Like, genuinely the most queued that I've ever come across. And while I might throw it down on the fucking totem pole as being horrible, I would say it's about average. Again, I'd probably put it at a C. Now, like I said, with Cough Harvest, since it gets played a lot, it can result in a lot of meme loadouts, like Trolgers and Demo Knights usually find a lot of frequency here, although Cough Harvest also suffers from having a lot of really try-hard skunts that will just fucking will just shit down your throat every single day. Or you'll have really try-hard snipers that will just basically have control of the entire map, since Cough Harvest has a lot of open areas. But Cough Harvest has that delicate balance of playing the objective while also just deciding to go on a deathmatch spree. And, you know, even though it is particularly small, it has a lot of openness to it with the ways that you can just, you know, trim through on the rooftops, or, you know, rocket jump into the windows. And now with the pyrothermal thruster, he can also, you know, get into the enemy's backline with relative ease. Like, I've constantly trimmed on the the shack that the respective teams have into the fucking building of the other team. And I'll just fucking surprise snipers that I even got up there before they did, because I was able to jump on that little roof into the hallway. But again, like, Harvest just, again, suffers from just being way too memey, I guess you would say, in design, and just way too open for certain classes to just get advantages. And conversely, we also have another Cough map, Cough High Pass. And this one I'll definitely put in A, because, again, Cough High Pass is almost like a better version of Harvest. Probably so, since it's a bit newer, so a lot of the design is catered towards more meta loadouts with the new addition of items and mechanics. There's a lot of great flanks, and there's not too much opportunities for snipers to control the entire point, since they'll get tunnel vision by certain cut-off sight lines. And again, like, most of the classes will benefit from it, so you'll generally have a pretty good time with this map, assuming that your team is well coordinated and whatnot. The only thing I'd probably keep it from getting an S rank is some of the weird geometry. Like, there was these rocks you can actually climb up, even though it looks like they wouldn't be really a really good setup for ramps. And a lot of weird windows that don't really add much purpose, but just a last-ditch getaway. And with that, we come to Payload Hoodoo. And Payload Hoodoo, boy, oh boy, is it... Especially considering that it's one of the newer maps. But Payload Hoodoo suffers a lot of the same really tight corridor issues with Badwater and Gold Rush. Although it's in scarce parts, like Stage 1 is especially bad with the tight corridor between point 1 and point 2. And then, you know, you have the large open areas, but there's just really long fucking sight lines and a lot of pointless geometry for just I guess they're just there for engineers to just put little teleporters where they can just teleport behind and just come up with a sneak attack, you know, if they want to. But yeah, the first stage of Payload Hoodoo is not that great. The second stage is a little bit better, but again, between point 1 and 2, there's this really long hallway that makes it kind of hard for the blue team to push in. And then there's this sudden open valley that can also be like a super advantage for the blue team, since they can just shoot down from these rafters on a gate on the right of the second stage. And then this third stage also suffers from that, mainly just because it's a huge choke in general. Like, you have these alleyways that are very reminiscent of Dustbowl, except now you have high and low points on top of trying to push a cart. And then, you know, the very final point is just like, good luck trying to push through, because guaranteed there's going to be at least 3 Engies that put sentries all around the final point. But, you know, Hoodoo's at least has, it takes it in bits and pieces. It's not the entire fucking map, like with Gold Rush or Dust. And with that is Junction. And normally, I would probably put Junction a lot higher on this list, if not for the fact that I'm basing this on its actual gameplay, you know, on the viability of its gameplay. And because CP Junction is such a tiny and enclosed space that it doesn't really benefit from it, I'm gonna have to put it in E tier, because it's just way too fucking small, man. And the final point, C point, is just so fucking easy to abuse with just so many fucking little sentries here and there and everywhere. Like, just a sentry that you can put on the rafters that will not be benefited from being destroyed with an Uber push, because you have to walk along this hallway into a stairway into this other tight corridor to get to it. So you're wasting all those precious 8 seconds just to make it there, assuming that you don't get pushed away by some pyros or whatnot. So yeah, it's just, you know, CP Junction, as much as I like playing it, yeah, it's not a particularly great map for anyone else that might want to actually have some openness, because you're not going to be able to play a weird meta class in this particular map, other than NG. Now, Core King, on the other hand, is probably one of my most favorite Core maps to play on, and very underutilized so. Now, I will say, even though I'm going to put this on an S tier, that there are some gripes with it, like, since it's set, like, in Tokyo or whatever, there's a lot of, like, weird billboards or whatnot that can block, scouts that are trying to jump around into the glass roofs. But I genuinely really like the aesthetic of it, and there's a lot of nice little drop-downs where pyros and soldiers can flee from sudden danger and get away from. But almost all of the classes can benefit from this. It's just a shame that, like with Cold Front, I don't often get queued up in this map, and usually get queued into a Harvest map, or a Nucleus map even. Now with Lakeside, oh boy, Lakeside. You know, I must be a fucking racist, because I guess I don't like the Egypt theme maps, but Lakeside, man, it's just another one of those maps that just has no excuse for why it's just so poorly designed. Like, I've just put it in an F, because it's just, like, not only does it have that, like, really heavy competitive variant to it for some odd fucking reason, but there's just, like, way too much openness for fucking snipers to take advantage of. In fact, the event version of this map is actually better than it, because it gives more opportunities for other classes to shoot down on the other team. It's just way too linear. The flanks aren't really even flanks. It just, there's too many fucking black ways that don't make any sense, like the little health packs near the ruined wall before the central point. And I mean, I guess I'll give it props for its aesthetic, but it's a pretty simple aesthetic to get down. It just doesn't really make use of its aesthetic in general. It's just really mired in issues in general. Well, at least the next map I can actually highly rate is CTF Landfall. And CTF Landfall is one of my most favorite CTF maps to play because it balances the whole deathmatch theme, but is actually one of the most open CTF maps to play on. In fact, it's one of my most favorite maps to play Trollger on because it allows me to actually go around in the map and I don't have to play, you know, Payload High Tower. You just have to hope that the other team doesn't have NGs that don't like the turtle and like to put their sentries in the central area with the big giant tree. I also genuinely like the aesthetic of these big giant like sequoia trees looming around. But yeah, there's a lot of really great openness to it. You know, there's not too many open areas for snipers to get an advantage of. Enough flanking areas for scouts, and again, a lot of really great placement of geometry for soldiers to really like use take hold of mobility with the rocket jumper. So with that, I rated it at a solid S. And with that, we have Lazarus, Koth Lazarus, which is another map that was introduced into the Jungle Inferno update. My voice is really fucking cutting off on me here, but I will carry on. So, Koth Lazarus, for it being a really new map, really has the worst aspects of the older maps like Dustbowl and Gold Rush. In Koth version 2, no less. Like, really, really unusually tight corridors leading into an open central point, which can just be easily abused with these cheeky sentry spots on the rafters up top, near the monument, as you would call it. And the pathways leading up to it are also really small, so Demo Man can just spawn in spam blindly with grenades with impunity. They don't have any issues to deal with. I just don't get why it's designed this way. Not to mention with the openness of the spawn room area, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It has no viability whatsoever to it. So it just doesn't add up in general. So with that, I'm going to put it in E tier, which is really a shame for a relatively new map. And with that, we have another relatively new map that is not going to be rated really high. Mercenary Park. Now, the release version of this map was pretty fucking dog shit. Like, there's these tricky little spots where basically NGs could put in sentries in geometry that doesn't make any sense, where the enemy can't even fucking see it. And fortunately, they patched this out, but it took a lot longer for them to patch out the real chokiness of the final point. And not to mention the fact that for it being called Mercenary Park, it doesn't really take advantage of the idea of it being a park. It just seems like an industrial building behind the actual entrance to the Yeti Park. In fact, the blue spawn is basically the entrance to the park, where you just go on this little, where you can see a little tram and then a display of the Yeti. So it just seems extremely counterintuitive. Not to mention the fact that the beginning point, once you cap the first 2 points, just gets completely locked off. Like, health packs will just suddenly not appear anymore in that respective area, and you have to rely on the second and third points, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not like when you cap the first 2 points of Gravel Pit, the health packs just suddenly disappear. It just doesn't really add up. It's just a confusing mess of a map that just contradicts its own fucking purpose. And with that, we come to Metalworks, yet another particularly competitive map, and it's also one of the few maps that is set entirely in the night. But with this, I actually like to rate it a little bit higher at a B, because while it does have a bit of a competitive edge, there is a lot of great flanking routes that aren't too confusing for new players to get a hold of. And there are generally some pretty good sight lines for snipers. There's pretty good sentry spots for NGs. There's not too much fucking verticality where, you know, soldiers can just, you know, shoot down on blindsided enemies. But, you know, there is a little bit of linearity to it in general, where there's not, it doesn't take too much, it doesn't take a much advantage of using raptors and whatnot. But again, there's also the competitive edge, so you might come across really skilled players that don't want to play competitive, that just want to basically shit down your throat, and that's just going to be a line I'm just going to use. And with that, we come to CP Moss Rock, another release, another map that was released with the Jungle Inferno update that just completely makes no fucking sense in terms of design. Like, I don't understand why, after you cap the first point, that literally a third of the map is completely pointless. There's like these huge rooftops that any class can jump on that don't do anything for that class. You can get up on it, you can surely jump down and surprise attack an enemy, but that's about the last time you're going to do it before they can just shoot down from up on top of you. And not to mention that the rooftops themselves are way too far away from the current objective, and don't even serve any purpose to the current objective. There's like a huge section of this map that is just completely wasted after you capture the first point. And not to mention, the second point has this fucking train that just runs through at random intervals through the red team spawn before the first point. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just like an arbitrary difficulty for the red team to get fucked over by a blue team because the blue team has really shit choke points to push through. I mean, that's my only reason for it being like that. Not to mention, the previous version of this map was actually supposed to be more like PL Gold Rush, PL Upward theme with the whole desert and upward setting, but it was changed to be a little bit more tropical in nature. So, again, another contradictory setup. But so I'm gonna put this at E because at least with Mercenary Park, most of the map gets used, even if it just straight up cuts off parts of the map. But maybe I would prefer that over Moss Rock's mostly unused geography after the first point. And with that, we come across, I believe that is CP Mountain Lab. Now, CP Mountain Lab would be a pretty decent map, but the design of it in general is really confusing. Like, there's a lot of fucking, like, really dark and unintentionally dark lighting in certain areas. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. There's a lot of flanks that don't really help the blue team all that much. And in fact, again, with the making note of the event maps, the event map version of Mountain Lab, which is called Man Manor, is actually a lot better, as it provides a little bit more leeway for the blue team to get an advantage on the red team. Like, for example, the final point on Man Manor actually has a more walkable, balcony that has been holed through, where the blue team can actually take advantage of their vantage point, but, you know, it doesn't allow them, allot them just absolute fucking dominance, as the red team can come in from the flank on the left. It just doesn't really make sense why the Mountain Lab is just so poorly lit. And it also suffers from over-reliance on verticality, where you just have these way too high rises for soldiers to just snipe down or just shoot down on the enemy. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in general. So with that, I'm putting it at a D. And here comes Koth Nucleus, another heavily played fucking Koth map, a little too often, frankly. And Koth Nucleus is, again, another fucking map that has so much unused geography that it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. There's like all these fucking rooftop areas that soldiers and pyros or any fucking mobility class can take advantage of and just surprise attack an enemy. And the enemy is basically none the wiser to it. It just puts the team that's not using it at a strict disadvantage. And maybe I can compliment that it's a completely circular map where you can basically have an infinite load of flanking routes. In fact, you can even use a little like weird fencing grates as like a pseudo walkway for spies or scouts to come and backstab the enemy when they're trying to get to the central point. After it's, you know, the walkways get activated and whatnot, but it just suffers from just having way too much advantages for mobility classes to just shit down on like heavies and engineers that aren't looking up. I mean, you could say, well, that's their own fucking problem, but I like to just take into account of the general viability within all classes, not just a few. And speaking of that is CP Powerhouse. Now, in spite of this map actually being released in like 2017, this map has actually been designed since 2007, and it really goes to show because CP Powerhouse is one of those maps that just gets annoying because of how long it takes to play the game. Because it's one of those maps that's a 3 CP map that you have to capture 2 of the 3 points, but it's almost nigh impossible to capture the final point, with the opposing teams having great fucking opportunities to just spam sentries or just spam down little points. And I mean, I guess that's kind of fun, like, here and there to play a fucking map for almost 2 hours. It just keeps going on, but it can just get really grating. It just kind of goes to show that even with a map that's released semi-recently, that it just suffered from the antiquity of it all. In fact, like Ace the Ocarina Maker actually previewed something where he actually displayed some of the unused area of the map that could have actually made it a lot more unique rather than just being a glorified deathmatch map that's not a CTF map. So with that, I'm putting that E tier. And with that, we come across yet another competitive map. And CP Process, I tell ya, is way too fucking competitive. Like, this map is the fucking meta for any fucking roaming Devilman or soldier to basically use that fucking jumping pathway to get to the central point. So as a result, queuing up for this map is kind of a pain in the ass because you're not going to have a lot of fun if you're playing against really good classes, or you're not going to be much to your team if they're much better than you and you're not doing much. It's just really it just really puts new players at a disadvantage. What with the weird tricks you can do with the rock face and some of the geography of the map. I mean, I guess it's pretty decent in geography. There's not too much abusive areas, but again, it just comes down to how much fun you're actually going to have with other players, and you're genuinely not going to have that much fun if everyone's just a fucking tryhard that will just shit down your throat without saying a single word. And with that, we come to a less competitive map, and one that's a CTF and COP variant, Sawmill. Oh, there we go. I put Sawmill variants, that's why I couldn't find it. Sawmill, I would put at a B. Now, the COP version is pretty decent, as there's these 2 areas that are not fenced off in the CTF version. And I generally like the aesthetic of it actually being like a rainy area, which is kind of rare for a Team Fortress 2 map in general. Like, a lot of it's either overcast, dry, or, you know, basically rainforest. And, you know, the CTF Sawmill kind of reminds me of, like, Oregon, you know, my home state, in a lot of ways. The CTF version does some kind of weird meta plays, like Trollger and like a teleporting NG, but it also kind of suffers from being way too deathmatch heavy, but that's usually a common issue with CTF in general, is that you're not really playing the objective, you're just killing the other team over and over again. But at least the COF version of Sawmill actually allows you to focus on the objective, and the 2 little flanking routes are not completely gated off for I don't know what reason. I don't know why it's cut off in in the CTF version, since you still can go over those areas with relative ease with a fucking ramp. But anyway, Sawmill gets a B for me. And then with that, we come to Thunder Mountain. Now, let's go to Thunder Mountain. Now, Thunder Mountain, I really do not like playing this map. There are just way too many high points, way too many open sight lines for snipers to just pounce on through, too many pointless little closets for health packs, And Thunder Mountain also suffers from a lot of unused geography, a lot of really poorly lit areas that don't really add up. Like the second stage has a lot of fucking like high-rise little hallways leading into the final point that don't really get used, and most of the time are just used for classes that just basically spawn camp the spawn of the red team. It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, considering it's a much newer map. It's just way too dark, it's just way too contrived in design, so with that, I'm going to give it an F. Oh, I think this might actually be Snakewater. I think the previous map that I covered that I thought was Snakewater was probably not. Yeah, like I said, this is not the most professionally, like, recorded video that I've made, but again, I'm just doing this off the cuff because I want to try to just get this off point genuinely in my head from what I can recall from playing it. Oh, that's Gravel Pit. Okay, so Snakewater already went into detail. It was at a B. With Gravel Pit is another release date map, so I'm sorry for confusing you by comparing Gravel Pit to Snakewater. Gravel Pit is also one of only 2 maps that has a 3 CP variant where, you know, you capture first A and B and then you go for C. Junction's the only other one, although I guess you could count Stand-In as one, which I believe I have on this list, but we'll get to that in a moment. And Gravel Pit, fortunately, is also at a B tier, because it's pretty decent for a release date map, with it having a lot of variants, although it does have an issue where the red team has to either basically split off the resources of teams to both points, or just focus on one point, but they also still have to micromanage their final point because they don't know if the enemy team is just going to set up with a bunch of sentries or just sneaky spies just waiting on the final point once they capture B. So there's some issues with that, to be fair, but at least Gravel Pit does have a lot of openness to it, and there's not too many choky points, so you know, NGs are not going to have a huge advantage over the enemy team with the multiple floors of the final point. So there you go. So Snakewater was supposed to be Gravel Pit, and I've already went over Snakewater. So there you go. I'm sorry, it's just the thumbnail size is so small that I can't really tell what the hell I'm even looking at, and you probably can't even tell either. So you know, give me a break here. Anyway, PL Snowy Coast. This is also another map that has a weird snowy aesthetic, and also a invasion community update variant. I don't know if this map was intended for the invasion update, but Snowy Coast has also gone through a lot of facelifts. Like, there was a lot of like weird design choices, like with the first and second points almost being right next to each other, and the red spawn being basically bottlenecked in. But they kind of fixed that with giving the red spawn a open grate on the other side once they actually capture the first point and are about halfway into capturing the second. So with that, I'll give it a B, since it does have its issues here and there, and I've played it a lot. It, you know, generally has enough going for it where most of the classes can benefit. Maybe Scouts might have a little bit of trouble with the first and second points, or just the entire team in general, as the sniper can go up on the huge semicircle building and just snipe down the other team if he's really good at it. And the only other option is to go underneath and over with the raptor up above, but it's also a small area where, you know, spam-worthy classes can just punch on through there, although they don't have the vantage point at least. But yeah, you know, it generally can be pretty fun. And with that comes the stand-in. Now, stand-in, like, is a very fucking... it's a very weird variant of CP, since it's kind of like CP combined with Capture the Flag. Or not Capture the Flag, but COF, where one of the two teams has to capture all 3 points at once to win. But as a result, there's a lot of, like, just having to divvy up your forces to try to maintain control of all 3 points. And seeing that it's really hard to actually queue up for this particular map, I've never actually been queued up for it, even if I fucking recommend it on my list. It just a lot of wasted potential in general. Even though it, aesthetically is pretty nice, but again, it also suffers from a lot of openness, and again, with just not being having to divide your forces is not a really good way to introduce players to a game called Team Fortress, where you have to play as a team. So with that, I'm going to put it at a D. And with that comes the CP Steel. And I know what everyone's going to say, this map is fucking confusing as shit. And yes, it is, because it's not particularly clear where you need to go to defend what points. I mean, I've played it enough to the point where now I kind of have an idea, although between points in C and D it gets really fucking confusing, and not to mention that you can basically win the game if you can capture E point before any of the other points, which is also a weird design choice. So with that, I'm going to put it at D, because again, with it being a relatively newer map, it doesn't have any excuse for why it has to be designed so poorly, with having such a really confusing layout, which is kind of ironic from Steam, because they removed Snowplow because it was too confusing for new players, even though it was pretty fucking simple in design, and yet they didn't kick out Steel for the same fucking reasons. So, anyway, with that we come to Koth Sweden. I'm assuming I'm saying that right. Now, Sweden has its moments. Like, aesthetically, it's pretty pleasing, like a nice, Japanese setup with a lot of weird, geometry. But as a result of the weird geometry comes a lot of issues. Like, there used to be a time when this map was designed where the central point could just be easily poked through from snipers, so they can just, have total control of the point while being safely within their spawn. Fortunately, they fixed that, but there's still a lot of issues. There's a whole section of the map that is just completely unused. There's a lot of hidden little trees and waterfalls where snipers and other classes can just hide in and just poke at the other team just for the lulz of it. I mean, I guess there's a benefit that you can also play Soldier on this if you're not really in it for the objective. But there's also a lot of weird fucking railings that are just designed weird, where you can just get caught in and stuck on, as well as a lot of weird waters. It's just really weird, but I mean, it's genuinely pretty open, and it doesn't give too much advantage over the classes, even with its flaws, but it's just mostly so-so in its overall design, even if it sort of beats out an aesthetic. And now we come to CP Sunshine. Now, CP Sunshine also has an issue with the competitive meta, but this is probably by far one of my most favorite CP, well, not CP maps, because I already said Cold Front is, but it is one of my favorite. Not my most favorite, because Cold Front is generally my most favorite map to play on ever. The CP Sunshine has the benefit of being genuinely a little bit competitive, having a competitive angle to it, but also being pretty straightforward in that you're not going to be confused of where to go or how to take advantage of certain rafters and roofs. There's clearly a lot of roofing on the central point that basically any class can actually jump on, even the heavy if he's lucky. And a lot of weird geometry that snipers can use, but the geometry is actually there for the purpose of snipers to, watch over the point or whatnot. And Sunshine is also a pretty nice variant of the Sunshine, with the bottom part being a large health kit that has a death pit, since, it's a Halloween event map. But yeah, CP Sunshine has a lot of balance to it. The endpoints are not just choke points for NGs to spam sentries in, nor can the blue team really get a huge advantage over the red team with their vantage points. They actually have to coordinate. So, it has a delicate balance between being, being competitive but also being casual at the same time. And with that, we come to CP Swiftwater, or PL Swiftwater, not to be confused with Snakewater. Probably one of the biggest payload maps I can think of, next to Enclosure. Although, Swiftwater is also a single stage rather than being multiple stages. And Swiftwater, again, has a lot of really good really good variants with verticality. Like the second point has a lot of weird catwalks for specialist classes like the soldier, or generalist classes like the soldier and demo man to spam from. But I think this map basically suffers simply because it's way too big in general, where there will be like shortcuts that'll be accessible to the team, but they won't really take advantage of it, which is kind of baffling to me because, you know, it can really help. Like the third point, there's a gateway that is viable to the blue team, but if you're new to the game and not aware of it, you'll just basically take the long way almost every single time, which means that I'm probably going to put this kind of at a B, mainly because I like that it's a genuinely pretty big area, so it gives for long, fun plays, but it also suffers from kind of just being wonky with the design, in that, you know, it doesn't really indicate to the blue team if new shortcuts have been made. And not to mention the last point is also another easily chokeable point with NG spam. And then comes the CTF turbine. Oh boy. If there was any fucking map that could better define deathmatch, it would be CTF turbine. You basically have two fucking tiny little fucking hallways with this big giant fucking arena where basically either team will just fucking kill each other over and over again and not gain any ground whatsoever. It's baffling to me that this map was even included in a competitive sense, since it's just easily like abused by just having a fucking cheeky spy or scout to just run for the point. And that's assuming that, you know, the points aren't just covered by a shit ton of sentries like most other fucking CTF maps do. But I guess, like, it sort of bears out a little bit better than 2-4 in that you're not completely abandoned in a way, because there's enough health packs if you can get into the hallways, and you're not too far away from the respawn locker if you do need health. So even though it's completely unviable for CTF for playing the objective, at least CTF turbine is a little bit better in 2-4 in that you're not just you're basically shit out of luck if you get stuck in the sewers or you're in the other person's base. So with that, I'm going to put it in E. And here comes in PL Upward. And most people usually praise this map for it genuinely having nice nice flanks and whatnot, but I've always really fucking disliked this map simply because of how way too open it is. Open in that pyros can just air blast you off to your death, considering that they changed the air blast to make it a lot easier for you to get environmental kills. Way too open for snipers to spam down, but not open enough for soldiers to take advantage of it either, since snipers have huge advantages in huge vantage points from like rooftops or whatnot. And there's also a little shortcut at the final spawn. The most new classes will have no fucking clue as to use, and it's not particularly indicated well since it's just kind of hidden in a weird spot, so they'll always take the long way before the third point gets captured. It's just, like, as much as I would like to praise it for its flanks, I really don't like how it just gives snipers an unusual advantage over any other team. So with that, I'm going to put it at a D, since it's still at least slightly decent in areas. And with that, we go to CP Vanguard. Now this map, I actually really like, aesthetically speaking. It's the only map in the entire game that looks like it's being, like, constructed, like a map that looks like it's just in the middle of construction, so it has a lot of industrialness to it. Now this map did go through some reworks, like the middle points had a lot more open areas for snipers to peek through, but they fortunately padded that out and added some neat little geometry to it to justify it being there. And generally, it takes real good advantage of the fact that the map is in construction by adding these, like, cranes with these rafters for NGs or soldiers to come up with a surprise sentry or mini sentry, or, you know, spam down on the point. There's enough flanking routes and, you know, flanking routes and weird areas where you can hide teleporters or sentries in. It's just genuinely a really fun map to play in that just does not get enough love. I barely ever fucking queue up on this, and it gets a glimmer in my eye when I actually do queue up for it. I think the only thing I could probably shit on it, the only gripe I could probably give it that would probably make it not an S tier is the fact that it did have some glitches in that you could trap the blue team and spawn with the rafters, and the fact that it had some design issues at release. But all in all, after that, it's been really fucking well made. Alright, we got 3 more maps to go. Hopefully we haven't turned off at this point. I might actually put a little timer in the pinned comment to let everyone know what my opinion of each of the maps are. Anyway, let's go to Koth Viaduct. This is probably one of the few Koth maps that is actually a competitive meta one, although the Koth version, the competitive version of this map is a lot different from the official version that you play, as there's this little walkway between the little areas where NGs like to turtle with sentries and whatnot. So with that, the turtling area is kind of an issue with this particular map. But I generally do have some fun playing this, even though it does center around a bit of a more competitive meta to it. So with that, I'm going to put it at a B. Seeing that there's a few little rafters and balconies that are called China and Japan for whatever reason, where snipers can just, you know, have entire field of view of the area and basically just continuously snipe unless they have a competing sniper to deal with. But, you know, I generally have a lot of fun playing this, since there's enough flanking routes and a lot of interesting areas for spies to hide in, where they're not just completely useless or have to basically throw themselves at the enemy in order to get through. And with that, we have 2 more maps to go. We got CP Well, the the arena version, the CP version, and the CTF version, although there is no arena version since it's not a official map. And CP Well, in spite of it being a release date map, is actually pretty fucking decent in all of its variants. With the CP version, sure, it's a little bit linear in design, but it has just enough flanking routes that are similar to that of Freight, although I praise Freight a little bit more than it. Although I will put Well at an A, simply because the CTF version of it also benefits from being a lot different from the CP. Instead of this big train yard, you have a single train yard that, you know, anybody can get killed in, but there's, you know, a variety of health packs along the way. And while there are some lookout sites for each of the yards where the snipers can pin down the enemy, there's enough cover for either team to, you know, not have to get fucking sniped down constantly by the snipers, assuming that they don't try to jump on top of the containers and the cover of the train yard. But yeah, CP Well does benefit from having really good variants of each other. I just personally like CP Freight better than CP Well specifically. But again, I put CP Well at the same level as Freight because it has a really good CTF variant that, you know, does have its deathmatch qualities to it, but it's still much more fun to play in than 2-Fort or Turbine. And with that, we have the final map, and extremely obscure one too, no less, Yukon. I almost thought I never fucking played this map, but then I remember what it actually looks like, and how it plays in general. Now, well, my memory is a little bit fuzzy with CP Yukon, But I guess it's just another one of those underrated maps that doesn't get really played a lot, because CPU-Con actually has a lot of clever choice of flanks. Although CPU-Con also has a lot of issue of lighting in certain areas and a lot of weird geometry for, you know, again, for soldiers and demos to just put cheeky little spam spots in. And I think the Final Points has a really convoluted design to it as well. But at least the D and B points are half decent at best, judging from my memory. But I probably put it about C since it's mostly well-rounded in all parts. So, that's it. This is my official personal tier list of core maps available when you queue up for casual on TF2 circa 2019. I'll probably change this when they update some of the certain maps or add new ones, but this is my official list. And just for a quick summary, to summarize, S tier I put in CP Coldfront, Core King, CTF Landfall, and CP Sunshine. For A tier I put CP 5 Gorge, PL Borneo, Core Brazil, CP Foundry, CP Freight, Payload Frontier, Core High Pass, CP Vanguard, and Well in all of its variants. For B tier, I put CP Gorge, not to be confused with 5 Gorge, CTF Double Cross, Payload Enclosure, CP Fastlane, CP Gravel Pit, CP Metalworks, Well, Sawmill in all of its variants, CP Snakewater, Payload Snowy Coast, Payload Swiftwater, and Core Viaduct. For C tier, I put Badlands in all of its formats, Payload Badwater, Payload Bartlett Blitz, CP Granary in all of its formats, CP Gully Wash, Core Harvest, Payload Hoodoo, Core Sweden, and CP Yukon. For D tier, I put in CP Dustbowl, CP Payload Gold Rush, CP Mercenary Park, CP Mountain Lab, Core Nucleus, CP Stand-In, CP Process, PL Upward, and CP Steel. For E tier, I put in CP Egypt, CP Junction, Core Lazarus, CP Moss Rock, CP Powerhouse, and CTF Turbine. And for F tier, I put in CTF 2 Fort, Core Lakeside, and Payload Thunder Mountain. So, let me know what you think about my choices, and if you have a counterpoint for any of these deserving a much higher tier, just let me know in the comments. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much with all the, rambling and whatnot. Anyhow, I hope this was informative.